98.1. So we're 98.1.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Let's bring up the page here. Hold on. Okay. So we're middle of the sugya, the subject of still of the days of Moshiach, and we're going to continue this for quite a bit. So we're holding on the bottom of the page, 4 lines from the bottom. So it says like this: Sha'alu Talmidov, the students asked of Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. The students asked Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. The Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, if I'm not mistaken, lived in Caesarea. Caesarea was then today still a beautiful city in the towards the north of Eretz Yisrael, and it was then a Roman city built by the Romans or by Herod for the Romans, with Roman aristocrats that lived in Eretz Yisrael, lived in Caesarea, some of them, and he lived there, and he had good relations with the Romans. We know about Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. He had good relations with the Romans. At his death, all the Romans came to his funeral, and it was at his funeral that afterwards is when on the way back from the funeral, and based on the conversation Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma himself had with Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, one of the 10 that were killed by the 10 martyrs killed by the Romans, is they saw Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion teaching Torah, and that's when they caught him and burnt him, etc. Hey, Avi. Bottom page, Sadeches Amid Aleph. So Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. The students asked Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, Emisai ben David ba, when will the son of David come, meaning Moshiach come? Amra misyarani, I'm challenged, so to say, or scared. Ani shema yitivakshu mimeni ois, that if I'm going to give you more information, you're going to ask for a sign. It's an interesting Gemara. It's not really. It's a little cryptic. They're not exactly sure what's happening in this Gemara. So Amar Loi. So the student said to Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, we won't ask from you a sign. The Yad Ramah says that he was in Rome at the time. We're not sure where Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma was at the time. Again, he had very good relations with the Romans. He lived in Caesarea when he was in Eretz Yisrael. Amar Lahem. So then he answered. This is why the Yad Ramah says he was in Rome, because it depends where he's referring to. When this gate, seemingly the gate, like Rashi says, that was in Rome, will fall and be rebuilt. V'yipol v'yibana, will fall and be rebuilt. V'yipol, and then it will fall a third time. This is all alluding, it's like a cryptic message. I don't know if he's talking about literally a gate falling. And the third time when they're going to try to build the gate, they're not going to have the time Mashiach is going to come. So that's when Mashiach is going to come. So what did the students say to him? So they said to him, they said to Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, Rabbeinu tein lanu ais, give us a sign. So he said that he doesn't want them to ask for a sign, but then they said, give us a sign. We'll see the Mefarshim, the commentators ask, why did they ask for a sign? Amr lahem, so he said to them, did you not assure me that you wouldn't ask for a sign? So Rashi says, Hashar hazer shel ir roimi. So here in the Gemara, it doesn't say where this gate was. So Rashi says this gate was in the city of Rome. That's why the Yad Ramah would say that he was in Rome at the time. In Rome was this gate. Again, what's definitely clear from the Gemara, that Rome is a representation of the superpower of the West. So in the time of Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, at the time of the Talmud, Rome was Rome. Today, Rome is not Rome. It's nothing, to be blunt. So Rome is referring to the superpower, which most of us like to believe is the USA, or something in that line, etc. The Rebbe spoke once about the fact that the UN was in New York, was kind of the Rome of its time. And they won't have time to build it a third time. So he said to them, they asked for a sign, and he said to them, didn't I ask you not to ask for a sign? You assured me you wouldn't. Rashi, the Mefarshim say again, Rashi says the city was in Rome. Riyad Ramah says he was in Rome. The Marsha says that from the other Gemorahs, it looks like Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma lived in Eretz Yisrael. Like I said, he passed away in Caesarea. It was Rabbi Chanan ben Tradian went to go see him in Caesarea. He said, we spoke about this Gemara once. He says, what's going to be with me? Why are you teaching Torah in public? Don't you know the Romans are strict? And he says, he asked him what's going to be with me, Olam Haba. The very fact that he was both a studious and a generous person meant it lishma. But at the end, on the way back from Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma's funeral, he killed Rabbi Chanan ben Tradian. So he obviously died in the time, he lived in the time around the aftermath of the uprising of Bar Kokhba, which was the Dar Hashmad. So Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, the Marsha says, lived there in Eretz Yisrael. Hey Shuki, at the bottom of 98a. So how could they say that this gate is in Rome? How could we be referring to this gate? He wasn't in Rome, he was in Eretz Yisrael. So he says, so there's opinions that answer that he originally lived in Rome, and then he went to Israel, which would explain how he had very good relations with the Romans, even during the degeneration of the Shmad after the aftermath of Bar Kokhba uprising. And the Ein Yaakov says that he has a girsa, he has a version of Rashi that says, Hashar hazeh shel roimi sheberoimi Hoya ba'isesha. He was there in Rome at the time, and therefore it's not a question. So it wasn't that he lived there, it wasn't that he once lived there, that he was just there at the time. His students were with him. So he said, also the commentators ask that why did they ask for a sign, even though they assured him they wouldn't ask for a sign? So when he said that the Moshiach is going to come when the gates of Rome fall, let's say according to everyone, it's the gates of Rome, whether he was there, he lived there, he referred to there. So the gates of Rome fell. They didn't feel that was a miracle. They wanted something more miraculous. I mean, again, you could, after 2,000 years and after what's been happening, a lot of people had attributed things like the World Trade Center. There's a lot of things that have been attributed to this Gemorah about the gates of, what does it mean, the gates of Rome falling? So, but they said it's not a miracle. They wanted to see a miracle. So they wanted it to be miraculous, not that it should be natural. So what's the nace? So he says to them, back to the text, Amrulai, Afal. They said to him, so we still want to have a sign anyways. Amrulahem means like the commentaries say they wanted a sign that's beyond just the gates of Rome falling. Amrulahem, if that's the case, you have Ma'aris Pamios Ledam, V'nefchu Ledam. So let the waters of the cave of Pamias, which is the source of the water that flows into the Jordan River, known as the Banyas River, the Banyas Falls. Right. So till today, those who know Eretz Yisrael, if you travel all the way north to the top of the Jordan River that leads into the Dead Sea, so you'll know there's the Banyas. The Banyas falls. So evidently the source of the Banyas is from a cave, and the water over there will turn into blood and turn into blood. The only problem with this ice is that it seemed like that was something that happened then. And they were, again, according to most commentaries, he was in Rome at the time of this conversation. So how would you be talking about the waters in the Banyas if he was in Rome? So the Ashlich brings down again that he was talking about Rome within Eretz Yisrael. If you remember last week, we learned that when it says that Moshiach is sitting at the gates of Rome, there's an opinion, the Ashlich says that he was sitting at the gates of Rome, of the city Rome, so to say, in Eretz Yisrael. Where that city is, it seems like it's near Tzipori. Tzipori is today the Galilee, which is over the west side of the mountains over the Kinneret. It means it's more east than Caesarea is. Caesarea is on the sea, but it's heading towards the Galilee, which is over the Tveria. But still, Tzipori is a good distance from Banyas, maybe an hour's drive till today. Okay, around that long, especially with the roads. So Rashi says, what's Mei Paimis? Sheyar de Noivim Mimeno. This is where the Jordan comes from, which means the Banyas water. Like we learned in Bechayres, Don Yoitzim Mimaris Paimis Mefarish Hasam Shaper. Okay, the Gemara of that explains. Here Rabbi Steinzal says, and we're going to, again, he doesn't have doesn't have the last line of the Gemara, so I'm going to have to read it from the original text. Rav Steinzelt says, what is this cave of the Peimas? The cave of the Peimas today called the Banyas. Like I said, the Banyas is one of the sources of the Jordan River. In the past, the waters of the Jordan emerged directly from the cave. And I've never seen the cave, but those of us who are from Seattle who've been to Snoqualmie Falls, the Banyas is like a little, a few feet of water, but it's an important source of water for the Jordan, which is an important source of water for Eretz Yisrael. So in the past, the waters of the Jordan emerged directly from the cave. It is located near the ancient city of Dan. I don't know where the ancient city of Dan is, but I'm assuming somewhere towards the north of Eretz Yisrael. I think there's Tel Dan. Yes, I think that there's till today there's a national park called Tel Dan. I think those would be and there's waters over there. I think that could be the connection to the waters of the Banyas. Okay, so he says, he finishes over here, but the Gemara finishes a little further. When Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma passed away, I'm reading from the original text. When Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma passed away, he wanted. This is a very complicated Gemara because why he said this. He obviously had the blessing of prophecy, what we call Ruach HaKodesh today, the divine spirit. Because of a lot of things the Gemara we learned about Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, he didn't just say things. So he said that bury me deep. It means when he died, he wanted his students to bury him deep. I don't know if we know where his grave is today. If we would know, I believe it would be somewhere near Caesarea. So he said, bury me deep. Why? She'ein kol dekel v'dekel shebebavel she'ein sus shel parsim niksher boy. Now he gives the prophecy of what's going to happen at the end of days. So he said, when they asked him when is Moshiach coming, he said when the gates of Rome fall twice after being rebuilt and falls a third time, doesn't get rebuilt. When they asked him for a sign, the waters of the Banyas turned to blood, seemingly at the time. We're talking about 2,000 years ago. When he dies is when he says is what's going to happen. When he dies, he says, bury me deep. Why? She'ein kol deka v'deka shebebavel she'ein Susha Parsim Niksharbai. Now, again, Bavel is what's today modern day Iraq. Persia is obviously what's today modern day Iran. The Persians conquered the Babylonians. So at the time, I think, if I'm not mistaken, even though Bavel was an empire at the time, but it was already, the Persians before that have conquered Bavel. The story of Purim, then the Greeks have conquered Babylonia, and then there was kind of the Persian Empire was around the time of the Roman Empire. I have to check it. That was what we learned about Malka Shava, etc. At some point, evidently the Persians kind of kicked out, and must have kicked out the Greeks, or they were the descendants of the local Greeks of the time. Either way, he says it seems like there's going to be a war between Bavel and Persia. Maybe those in the 80s thought that was the Iraq-Iran war that happened then. But he says, every dekel is a palm tree of Babylonia is going to have horses of the Parsim, of the Persians, meaning the Persians are going to conquer Bavel. And there's not going to be a casket in Eretz Yisrael, she'ein sus madai oichel by Tevin, that the Medes, the Persians and the Medes are going to eat from the grave. So because he didn't want, basically what he was hinting at was that the Persians are going to conquer the Babylonians, and the Medes and the Persians are going to conquer Eretz Yisrael, because he wasn't buried in Bavel. So he says that his Aron, his ark that's in Eretz Yisrael, the horses of the Medes are going to eat from the grass growing out of it, and therefore he didn't want to be desecrated by the horses of the Persians, and he asked them to bury him deep. Like he says, Rabbi Steinzel says, during the wars, all the coffins will be removed from the ground and used as animal throws. I do not want my coffin to be used for that purpose, so therefore he said, bury me deep, maybe that they shouldn't know where he's buried. And they're going to conquer. So seemingly from Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, at the times of Moshiach, the Persians are going to conquer the Babylonians, which again is what would be Iraq, and then conquer Eretz Yisrael. This is not positive news for us today. She'ein sus, Rashi says, she'ein sus madai oichel by teven She'ein sus madai oichel by teven shemaitzin ha'araynis chutz lekarka, like it says, they would take the coffins out of the ground. V'aisim hem avasusim v'mechamas goy gemagig. Oh, so now Rashi, again, we're going to have a lot of, according to, if you just learned the original text of the Gemorah, doesn't say when this is going to happen. At some point, I don't know Persian history. I'm quite certain that in the past 2,000 years, the Persians and the Babylonians had more than one battle between each other. I'm sure there's challenges, there's challenges many times. So it could be any war that the horses of the Medes are going to conquer. Saliadim, who came there, when the Muslims conquered Eretz Yisrael from the Crusaders, right? So that also could be what he was referring to, that the Persians are going to come to Eretz Yisrael. But then Rashi goes and says it's talking about the war of Gog and Magog. That during the war of Gog and Magog, which Gog and Magog is the war clearly prophesied for the war before in the days of Moshiach. So Rashi says that's when the Persians and the Medes are going to bring the horses to Eretz Yisrael, uproot the graves, and use the coffins as for stalls for the horses. So he says she'ein kol deker claimer asid parsi. Now here Rashi now explains what Rabbi Yossi Mikismo is saying, not claimer, meaning to say asidin parsi pyres umadai when the days of Mashiach, the Persians and the Medes. I don't know if anyone has any info on who are the current day Medes, but the Persians and the Medes. Bruce, any information on that? So the Persians and the Medes. Maybe they're just different ethnicities of that area. Lave el Bavel, first they're going to come and conquer Babylonia. That Bavel today, modern day Bavel is Iraq. The entire Bavel is going to be full of Persian soldiers, Visusehem and their horses. Therefore, they're going to tie their horses to the dekel, to the trees, and Mishambaim like the Maisa. So where the Gemara is kind of alluding to a war that's going to happen between the Persians, the Medes, and the Babylonians, and then seemingly in Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't mention Eretz Yisrael. It could have been talking about any time, right? Like I said, the Muslims came and conquered Eretz Yisrael 1,000 years ago in the time from the Crusaders. But Rashi goes and says we're talking about Gog and Magog again. In all this, even Rashi lived in that time. Rashi lived in the time of the Crusades, right? So it's hard to understand exactly what he's referring to, as far as like everyone says, at the end of the day is with all the information, we don't know anything. So he says, no commentaries that I have here bothered to give any more info. Amar Rav says, another complicated Gemara, seemingly following what Rashi learns in the past Gemara. So Rabbi Yossi Mikismo again. Rabbi Yossi Mikismo was a visionary. He saw that Rabbi Chanina Mitradion would be burnt. He knew. He said he knew what would happen to the 10 rabbis that were taken. They asked him about the days of Moshiach. He said about the walls of Rome falling and the gates of Rome, the waters turning to blood. And then in his passing, by mentioning how he should be buried, he was telling us what's going to be with the wars from the Persians, which is today modern day Iran, and the Medes against both Babylonia, and then eventually in Eretz Yisrael, they will conquer Eretz Yisrael. Again, Mir Hashem, that's just something that happened already. But although Rashi says we're talking about the wars of Gog and Magog. Amar Rav says, Ein ben David ba the malchus harasha al Yisrael tisha chadashim. Now we don't know which Rasha is. Others say that this is talking about Malchus Roimi, that the Romans will conquer. Again, Rome is Western civilization, that or Christian countries. That's what we have to assume what Rome is when we talk about Rome. Then to Rome today. Hold on, Aaron. That Rav says that when Mashiach is not, Mashiach is not going to come until the Malchus Harasha, the wicked empire, is going to going to disperse throughout Eretz Yisrael for 9-month period. Shnemer, he quotes a verse in Micha, L'chein yitim ad eis yoyleda, yolad v'yeser echav yeshuvin al b'nei Yisrael. So the verse says, therefore will he give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth, which labor is a 9-month period. That's why Rav says 9 months. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return with the children of Israel, meaning to say a period equivalent to the term of pregnancy passes, the redemption will come. So it's going to be a 9-month period where there's going to be some sort of rule of the Malchus Harasha, the wicked empire, over, which is the Rome was known in the Gemorah as the wicked empire, over Eretz Yisrael for 9 months. Yes, Aaron?
Okay. So you're saying,
Let's be clear because you're muffled. Go.
am I muffled now?
Yeah, you're good. Thank you.
Okay. Everything you said about all these wars, my question is that they have to happen before Mashiach comes. But my understanding from what you said is it could have happened decades, centuries, 1,000 years already happened ago. And
go ahead, continue.
okay, my question is that's the case? It could have happened. It may not have, but it could have. Or does it have to happen within a short period of time before the other stuff happens?
So that's my point. My point is, if not for Rashi saying that this is the war of Gog and Magog, so we could have said that he was talking about something that's going to happen. He didn't say he wasn't directly connecting to Mashiach. He was talking about how they should bury him. And if you talk practically, they should bury him deep in the ground, so his coffin doesn't get used in the time of war. He could have been alluding to any time. The things that he said happened. The Persians conquering the Middle East and conquering Eretz Yisrael happened, but that happened in the time of the Crusades. What we're holding now is, but that's not the war of Gog and Magog. The war of Gog and Magog has to happen before Mashiach. Rashi says that in the war of Gog and Magog, that says So if Rashi is not meaning it's talking about Gog and Magog, we have to assume we're talking about a war that has not happened yet.
Wait, war of Gog and Magog. Once you know that's it and you've proven it, then Mashiach can come, but it has not come yet.
That is, I don't know if anyone would say that these are challenging things. People like to have believed World War I, World War II. These things happen are Gog and Magog, but there's a long period of time from the prophecies. It's the Gog and Magog is very much. I just heard a news podcast where someone is saying the United States is Gog and Magog because of and the idea of the 9 months. He quoted this Gemorah. Listen, everyone has theories, and everyone's entitled to their theories.
So let's not worry about theories. Let's just talk. It could have happened already.
I don't believe so. We're not talking. Gog and Magog is a war that has to happen leading up to the days of Mashiach. That's the prophecy.
And how long? How many months, years, whatever before?
It has to be in the days of the coming of Mashiach. So seemingly the days of the coming of Mashiach has to. I mean, if Mashiach were to come in the next year or so, then there would be now. But that's okay. But to say that it happened in the time of the Crusaders is a little far fetched.
But let's just say I understand that. But let's just say World War I or II. Could that be?
I don't know.
Okay, so no one knows. We're just guessing.
Which is So he said the Mashar brings down that the reason why Rav said 9 months, so we quote the pasuk from Micha, it's like a pregnancy, that after the pregnancy and the birth is going to come the Shuvam, the Yeshuvim Bnei Israel, the Jews are going to return to Eretz Yisrael. And he says, Al Bnei Yisrael, Yeshuvin Al Bnei Yisrael. Rashi says, Hanu kol ha'olam she'Yisrael mufuzarim bay. Meaning to say, Rashi says, Al Bnei Yisrael and kol ha'olam she'Yisrael mufuzarim bay. Seemingly that this wicked empire is going to rule all the places where the Jewish people are. And because the Jewish people, Rashi says, are spread out everywhere, he's going to rule over everywhere, including Eretz Yisrael, of a 9-month period. So it seems like there's going to be a superpower that's going to kind of conquer the world. And because it says, Al Bnei Yisrael, and kol ha'olam she'Yisrael mufuzarim, wherever the Jews are found. Well, today Jews are everywhere, but you could even talk about major Jewish communities, which United States, Europe, Australia, and other places like that. Again, if you look at it without being so strict in the rules, you could say Western civilization. Today, a large majority in the Jews, if you exclude Russia and certain Asian countries and certain Middle Eastern countries, and I would say 80 to 90% of the Jews today live in Western civilization. They live in Christian countries. So if you can say that Malchus Harasha is referring to Rome, is referring to Western civilization, if that's what you'd want to believe, so you would be talking about Al Bnei Yisrael. Rashi says, doesn't have to be that one king is king over all of them, but it's a mentality or a way of life that's a king over all of them, and you could say that's applicable today. Marsha says, everyone's entitled to their opinion and to disagree with me. That's just how maybe I see it. The Marsha says, the reason why 9 months is because we know that the Chevli Mashiach, we're going to learn about the birth pains of Mashiach is like a birth. And because it's like a birth, so therefore it's going to be a 9-month period. again, does 9 months mean 9 months? Does 9 months mean a period of time? 9 is a unit in time in Judaism. There's the 9 spheros, which are there is a period. There is a concept of the number 9 in as a number unit in Torah, and definitely in Kabbalah. So that's why he says. So here's an interesting thing. It's a famous in Yaakov. And Yaakov says it's customary to say when it's good for anyone who's expecting or will be a marriage to Hashem, or their children will be expecting children at some point. Marriage to Hashem for everyone. So and Yaakov says the reason. So because the days of Mashiach or the arrival of Mashiach is like the birth pains of a childbirth. Therefore, he says, "This is why we say the Lam Netzeach before we say Uvalatzion. Uvalatzion is when we come to Zion, alluding to the idea of the redemption, because the Lam Netzeach is a segula for a person. It's a remedy for a woman who's giving birth, that she should have an easier birth. Like it says in the Alkut Chodesh, that the 9 verses of the Lam Netzeach correspond to the 9 months of labor, of pregnancy, and the 90 that's 9 verses, and the 90 words correspond to evidently 90 cries of childbirth, and therefore we say Lam Netzeach before we say Uval Tzion Goel, to that a person should kind of, if you want to bring on an easy pregnancy and easy childbirth, that's one of the remedies to say that. So he says Rashi over there in Micha again says clearly that we're talking about the war of Gog and Magog and the returnees that are subjected to the rule of 9 months. Okay, Amar Ula. Now comes the question. After we've described the days of leading up to Mashiach, do we want to merit to see those days? Right? Is something one would want to experience? Amar Ula says, he says, let him come, let the Mashiach come, but after my death, I will not see him. He doesn't want to see the coming of Mashiach. He does not want to experience the birth pains of Mashiach. Rabba, the great Rabba, which was one of the Rosh Hashivas of Rava and Abaya, Yosef, let him come, I don't want to see him. He'd rather not live in the days of Mashiach. His counterpart, Rabbi Yosef, who ended up later becoming the Rosh Hashiva, he was offered to be Rosh Hashiva, and instead he yielded to Rabba, but Rabbi Yosef was blind, very humble. It says there's no more humility because Rabbi Yosef represented humility. So he says, Yesi let him come the iski, and he should merit the Eisef Betula the Chufufis Techamra. Rabbi Yosef said, let him come, Mashiach, and I'll be privileged to sit in the shadow of the donkey's excrement, So he looked at it as opposite, that it's a schutz, it's a merit to live in the days of Mashiach. Even if he has to sit in the donkey's excrement, that's worth it for him. He's meaning to say, like Rabbi Steinzal says, I'm willing to undergo all the pain and disgrace associated with arrival, right? All the belittling the Jewish people are going to go through, as long as he should experience the coming of Mashiach. And again, we learned the Mefarshim said last week about the lepers who were sitting with the Mashiach, especially according to the version of the Ashlich that he's in heaven, that those are the tzaddikim who took on themselves the Chevle Mashiach, the birth pains of Mashiach. And again, then Yaakov says the reason why, unlike Rabbah, he says that Rabbi Yosef wanted to experience it because Rabbi Yosef was humble. He was a humble person. It says the commentators interpret the statement Reb Steinzot says as an allusion to the fact that even for the one who will not be privileged to enjoy the elevated spiritual level of the Messianic era, even those elements of the Messianic era that are related in a way to Mashiach's physical aspects, Chamor in Chomer, which is symbolized by his donkey, are worth anticipating. So the Netzach Yisrael says that even if you're not going to be worthy of experiencing all the spiritual levels of Mashiach, it's worth it to be, even for the Chomer, even for the benefits that we're going to have when he comes eventually, when he comes speeding in our time after the Chevle Mashiach. So Rabbah and Ula didn't want to go through the pain for the gain of Mashiach. Rabbi Yosef said, "I'll go through all the pain and humiliation and humble and to be humbled as long as I could experience the coming of Mashiach." So Abaye again is the student and nephew of Rabbah. So Abaye says to Rabbah, Abaye says to Rabbah, who said he does not want to live in the days of Mashiach, my time, why don't you want to? Ile mishum chevloi shel Mashiach. Chevle Mashiach can mean one or two things, like Rashi says, the chevel, the rope or the pain of Mashiach, and he didn't want to experience the pains of Mashiach. Vatani, we learned, Shalu Talmidov es Rabbi Elazar. The students asked Rabbi Elazar, Mayas Adam v'notu mecheves shel Mashiach. Should a person do in order to protect themselves from the birth pains of Mashiach, from the pain of the days leading up to Mashiach? Again, like the Micha says, the coming of Mashiach is described as a childbirth, and just like this child pains, therefore that we say Lam Natseach before Voltzi and Goyal, to try to lessen the Chevle Mashiach, the birth pains of Mashiach. So what should a person do? What are the remedies to do? So evidently you could say Lam Natseach Yanch Hashem B'Yam Tzara, or you could also be Yasik B'Torah. You should learn Torah Gemilas Chasadim. So I guess there's lessening the pain and there's not experiencing the pain. So if you're going to be preoccupied in Torah and Gemilas Chasadim, Marha Torah Gemilas Chasadim. So Abaye challenged Rabbah, why are you scared? You both have Torah and you both have good deeds, so you're not going to experience the birth pains of Mashiach. Again, anyone who's studied the beginning of Tanya, we know that the level of humility of Rabbah was the beginning of Tanya, the whole basis. With Alter Rebbe builds the foundation based in Talmud, that what is the level of the Beinoni, which the Tanya is known as the Sefer of the Beinoni, the middle person, the person who's not the tzaddik, not the rasha, is not that the person who's kind of does some mitzvahs and some averos, some transgressions, but the basis that the Tanya says, that the hint, the proof to his teaching that the Beinoni has no sin at all, not in speech, thought, and action, is from Rabbah. Because Rabbah said, "Can go in and not Beinoni? I'm a Beinoni." And Rabbah was an absolute tzaddik, meaning to say he didn't do anything wrong. But he considered himself a Beinoni because the Beinoni doesn't do anything wrong. It's just that you still, like the Tani says, he still deals with the challenge. So Abaye challenges his uncle Rabbah when he says, "I'm a Beinoni." He goes, "How could you say you're a Beinoni? You're a great tzaddik." And here again, he challenges Rabbah in the same humility that Rabbah has. You see, there's different levels of humility, right? Rav Yosef's humility says, "Let me suffer the pains of Mashiach." Rabbah's humility is that I'm not worthy not to suffer the pains of Mashiach. But it's not the same thing, right? Rabbi Yosef says, I don't care to suffer the pains of Mashiach. Rabbah says, even though Abaye says you're not going to suffer the pains because you have Torah and Gemilas Chasadim, you have both Torah and good deeds, and that's enough of a remedy, of a schus that you shouldn't have to have the birth pains of Mashiach. Nevertheless, he answers him, like we'll see in a second, my time, Amr la Yachmina, why don't you want to see it? Chevle Mashiach. So Rashi says, now we're going to go into what does it mean, Chevle Mashiach. We find the word Chevle connected to the word Geirole, a person's lot, right? The common boy, we find that in verse also. The common boy, Maihi, what is this? We'll find what is this Chevle Mashiach? What does this mean? Lashon Acher, another opinion is Chevle Pachadim v'chavalm sheyir b'yamav michel oivdik chavim, the fright of what's going to happen from the armies of the Gentiles, the armies of the idol worshippers, that he didn't want to have to experience. Again, Rabbah wasn't living in horrible times, but he was living under Bavel at the time, right? He didn't live in Eretz Yisrael. Not that Eretz Yisrael in his times was any better. So he says, Amr Lei, so Rabbah answers Abaye. This is a famous teaching of the Gemorah, Shema Yigra Machet, that Rabbah was never confident with who he always was viewing himself as the Beinoni, right? And the Beinoni could sin. So Abaye says, you learned Torah and you did Gemilas Chasadim, good deeds, so you should, and Rabbi Eliezer said that a person who does that won't experience the Chevle Mashiach, the birth pains of Mashiach. So why was he concerned? And he says to the fact that he doesn't want to live in those days. So he says, Shem Yigram Chet, maybe I did sin. And maybe the sin is going to override my merits. Where do we see that sin could override merits? It's a famous Gemorah, the Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. Like Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said, the Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi Rami, he asked the question, famous question. It says when God is talking to Jacob, he says, "V'hine anoichi imach," I'm with you, before he goes to his uncle Lavan. Ushmarticha b'chol asher telech, and I'm going to be watching you wherever you go. So he has God's protection. God promised Yaakov he's going to protect him. And then when Yaakov comes back home to meet his brothers Esav, the verse says, Yaakov gets very afraid and distressed. So how can it's a contradiction? If he has God's protection, why would you be concerned? Why do you have anxiety? Why does he have fear? So he answers the famous answer, he was scared that Yaakov was scared that maybe the protection that God promised him was based on a certain level of behavior, and maybe he sinned, and the sin caused that the Alter Rebbe Tanya brings this. The Moshe also was concerned, and why were they concerned? The Rebbe has a whole beautiful talk about this and about the idea of bitachon, about trust. How if Yaakov was right, some people view that Yaakov was punished for being scared, and Moshe was punished for being scared. And so here the Gemorah says, what do you mean? Maybe they did a chait. If they did a chait, so they had a good reason to be scared. The question is, the Rebbe introduces the idea of Yiddish trachgut v'zangut, that if you were really positive thinking, it even overrides the idea of sin. But here he says, maybe he had sin. How do we know that sin could change how things could be, meaning Yaakov had protection from God, and maybe the sin would change that, and therefore Rabbah doesn't want to live in the days of Moshiach because maybe he has sin, and then that would override, so to say, wipe away his chusim, his merits of his Torah and good deeds. Tanya, we learned, so Gemorah that's brought down in Sota, Ad Yavram Hashem. We say we're going to say next week in the Oz Yashir, we say Ad Yavra Am Hashem, Ad Yavra Am Zukunisa. Ad Yavra means we're going to pass over. So Zu be a Rishona. The first time it's talking about the first entry with Joshua to the land. Miraculous. All the Jewish people came in. The walls of Yericho fall. Ad Yavra Am Zukunisa, Zu be a Shnia. It's a very hard Gemorah. We'll see in a second why. That there's a second entry of the land, which is when the Jewish people returned after the destruction of the first temple with Ezra the scribe, and that was nowhere near the entrance of the land of Yeshua. He had to force people to come. They had no money. They couldn't properly build the temple. They were under the Persians still. The main thing was they were under the Persians. They had to get permission from Daryavish, Koresh, right? So it wasn't like entering the first time when they walked in free Jews. So the Gemara says, what does it mean? From this we see from the very fact that we compare the first entry, the second entry of the land, like the first entry of the land, that the Jewish people were supposed to have miracles when they entered the second time Eretz Yisrael with Ezra, like when they entered the first time, like when they entered with Joshua. There was a sin. So you see, even though clearly when the Jewish people sang the Shira, they were referencing to a possibility of an entrance the second time into the land. It would be like the first time with Joshua. Nevertheless, because there was sin, it didn't enter that way. We went in we were subjects of the Gentiles. You had to go. Nehemiah had to go with soldiers. Ezra. Okay, we all know the story. It wasn't pleasant entering the second time. What's the obvious question to this? The obvious question that I always have for this Gemorah is, again, this is a Gemorah in Sota, is that the only reason why they were in Galus in the first place is because there was sin. What is the sin he's talking about? That there was a goyim chet. Seemingly the chet was that they served idols and they did the destruction of the first temple. But if not for the sin and destruction of the first temple, they never would have left in the first place. The only reason there was a second entry to the land with Ezra and the third entry with Moshiach is because there was sin. So obviously it's a little bit of a complicated thing. So let's see what Rashi says. What does it mean to have a miracle when they entered the land with Ezra for the second time? That it wouldn't be with this, it says that the Gemorah in Rosh Hashanah, Shuki, those who were learning with us Rosh Hashanah, we learned about how complicated it was to build a second temple under Daryavish. He came in, the planning, he got involved in the blueprints, he wanted trees, he wanted wood and beams, he was mixing, he was meddling in things he shouldn't have. They had no choice, he was the king. So he says that they were worthy to have an S, like they were forced by Egypt, they could have had force over the king of Persia. Doesn't say that they would have that Persians would suffer. The Persians didn't exile the Jews; they just took over from the Babylonians, but they wouldn't have to be subjects of them. Seemingly, Rashi says, "Bibi Shnia." When is the second time they entered the land? Bimei Ezra, the day of Ezra, Kibiya Rishayim Bimei Yeshua, like the pasuk compares Ad Yavra the first time coming in to the second time coming in with Ezra. So obviously, it doesn't still answer the question unless they sinned in Bavel maybe like what Yecheskel says, they wanted to see Kolbenes, they wanted to be, the Jewish people wanted to be Cholam Beis Yisrael. And Yecheskel said, with a strong hand, Biad Chazaka. So it could be, there were sins that were done also in Bavel itself. It means the sin of destruction is one thing, but the entry of the land, they still weren't so worthy. Maybe the sin of Purim, I don't know. But it's seemingly, if you're just talking about the sin of Avodah Zarah, the sin of Avodah Zarah was why they were not in the land in the first place. I don't see if he says over here the sin. No, it doesn't talk about the sin. Yeah, and they had to go with Koresh's permission. Okay. So the Gemorah says, "V'chein Rabbi Yochanan." So too Rabbi Yochanan says. So we had so far the opinion of Ula, Rabba, and Rabbi Yosef. Ula and Rabba do not want to be experienced at the days of Mashiach. Ula is not challenged. Why? Rabba he feels that maybe he caused sin to be unworthy to not experience the Chevle Mashiach. Rabbi Yosef says it would be my honor to experience the Chevle Mashiach. I'd rather sit under the donkey of Mashiach and to take in the pains for Am Yisrael. We see different people for how they view things. Either way, so Rabbi Yochanan, who was the leader of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, the one who authored the Talmud Yishalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, he says also, I'd rather he come and I don't experience it. So he had a student / brother-in-law, Reish Lakish, and also he was Makarev, and Reish Lakish was Makarev to Torah, was brought close to Torah through Rabbi Yochanan. Also he became his Bar Plukta, the one who he argued with all the time. So Amr Reish Lakish said, my time, why don't you want to visit? Why don't you want to be in the times of Mashiach? Now he goes into describe the verses that talk about the things the unpleasant things that are going to happen in the days of Mashiach that Rabbi Yochanan would not want to experience. If you want to say, because of what it says, just like a person, basically he's describing the days of Mashiach in such a way. Like a person is in the field and runs away from a lion. Seemingly you run away from a lion that's it, to protection. But you run right into a situation of Pagay Adov. And from the lion you run into the bear. So you're going from one difficult situation to the next difficult situation. Ubaha Bais, then you come home, and you just try to get your balance, so to say. You put your hand on the wall, and then the snake bites you. Meaning that difficulty follows difficulty, which follows difficulty. You keep on trying to run to shelter and protection, and horrible things keep on following you. So it says, you don't have to worry about, say that's specifically Mashiach. A person could experience that today. For instance, you could go out to your field, which is your parnasa, your livelihood, and you meet the santer, which is the government-appointed inspector who inspects your land and says where are the legal boundaries of your property, and cuts your property in half. Says, this is not your property. Your properties, these are your boundaries of your property, right? When you bring in an inspector, they want to check if you built everything right. So the santer comes in and damages your business, your parnasa, because he or she cuts your size of your field. So that's daim gemisha pagari. That's like as if you met a lion. I guess one could analyze why is the lion the inspector. Nichnas lior paga by gabai. He goes back from the field, from outside, back into the city, and he meets the guy, the tax collector. So now first he's getting hit on his income, and now he's getting hit on his income tax. That's like as if you met the bear. Nichnas leveisai. So now he's financially challenged. His income isn't good, and the taxes are high. So he goes home to try to provide. It means they rely on him to provide. He sees his children starving, hungry. He can't give them food, shelter. That's the snake. So Rabbi Reish Lakish says, that's something seemingly that could happen at any time. My time. Rashi says, Reish Lakish asked him, what are you concerned about is going to happen in the days of Mashiach that you want to avoid? Says Santer, he says in Bab Basra says, Bar muchsenaya sheyoyde meitzer hasadis v'gvuleyan. He knows all the boundaries of the fields. So he's telling you what is your field boundaries. So if you thought that you had an acre, now he tells you have half an acre. Ad kan shalplani mikan ve'el shalplani. He's the one who decides for the government where your boundaries stop and someone else's property line starts. Because he's the state inspector, he's the one who has the final word to say where your property line ends and the next person begins. So Rashi says when the state inspector comes and tries to shorten or make smaller your boundaries, that's like you met a line. What's a gabai goy v'mas hamelech, the one who collects taxes? So you're getting hit both by your source of income and your income tax, and then it affects what you could provide for your family. Basically, what we see from Reish Lakish is what he's asking Rabbi Yochanan. It seems like aside from all these big wars, sometimes big distractions help a person be distracted by day-to-day life. Reish Lakish says it's not, you don't have to be talking about big distractions. You can be talking about just the difficulty of getting through the grind, right? Your business is challenged, your income is challenged, your means of providing your family is challenged, and Rabbi Yochanan doesn't want to experience that. He says some hold that this is from the Greek, okay, where the word comes from. Or either way, it's the one who gives the inspector, who gives the property line. Let's just go a little further. So Rabbi Yochanan said to him, no, that's not what I'm concerned with. Because it says, Shalu no re'i im yoyled zachar madu re'isi kol gever yodav al chalotzav k'yeledav v'nehefchu kopanim l'reikon. So he says like this, ask now and see whether a man gives birth. So he doesn't, right? So why then do I see every man, kol gever, with his hands on his loins as a woman is in labor, and all faces turn green? So if you're not giving birth, why are you pretending like you are giving birth? Why are you showing as if you're in birth pain? So he explains, Mari isi kol gever, Amar Rava bar Yitzchak, Amar Rav. Rava bar Yitzchak is obviously another Rava because it's the name of Rav. Misha kol gvura shaloi. V'nepcha kol panim l'reikon. We'll see the commentaries argue on what this means. So what does it mean? Which gevura? Basically, your Miyahu is asking, if you see, could a man give birth to a child? No. So madua reisi kol gever. Why do I see every gever? Gever is supposed to be a person of strength. The word gever is from the word gvura. Yadav achalotzav ki'eleda, as if he's giving birth. His hands are on his loins and his face is all green. So who are we referring to? There's arguments if this is referring to Hashem or is referring to people. Misha kol gvura shalai. Who's the Gibor? The Gibor is God, who all the Gvura belongs to him. What does it mean the face turned green? Rabbi Yochanan said, we'll see what this means in a second. Both in the upper realms and the lower realms. What's going to make them turn green is when Hashem, this is those who were in the shmuz yesterday, says, who's better? Why are the Jews any better than the Gentiles? He says, God say, Halalu ma'asi yadai, these are my handiwork, but Halalu ma'asi yadai, and the others are my handiwork. Why are the Gentiles being destroyed, or the idol worshippers, or those who oppress the Jews being destroyed from instead of the Jews? Why are the Jews any better? And therefore the Pamali Shemaila, therefore they turn green, they get nervous. Why is God saying that? See, the Rebbe Steinzal says, it appears that the Holy One, blessed be He, does not distinguish between the Jewish people and the Gentiles. That is why Rabbi Yochanan was concerned with regard to the coming of Moshiach. He says, if God is going to be asking the question, why are the Jews any better? He didn't want to be there for finding out how that conversation goes. So he said, I'd rather not be here. It means the tax collector, my property line, Mela, that I could struggle through. But to have a situation where God is asking why are the Jews better than the Gentiles, and that conversation he didn't want to be part of. So he says, Misha kol gvur shaloi. It's talking about, so he does, but the Gemorah doesn't say who is that referring to. So Rashi says, Misha kol gvur shaloi, the one who has all the strength is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's talking about God. Mitztar ba'atzma, he himself is in pain. That means the verse of Jeremiah who says that the Gever who's holding his hands on his loins is God himself, so to say, who's in pain as if he's giving birth. God is saying, why am I destroying the Gentiles over the Jews? What does it mean, the upper realms and the lower realms? The angels are nervous and the Jews are nervous. That doesn't, I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. Whatever it's not supposed to be, it's not in the Talmud. Okay, so he says, I'm going to see where Rabbi Steinzat says, and others also have commentaries, and we're going to finish here. He says, Rashi says that we're referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God is going to be in pain like a woman in childbirth in the challenges of the days of Moshiach, when he's going to have to ask the question why the Jews are better to be, that God is going to come protect the Jews over the Gentiles. So he says, Kach Bish Rashi, but Yad Ramah, in this whole Gemorah, we're going to stop in the middle, but the Gemorah continues with this kind of Rashi's questioning how Rashi looks at the challenges of the days of Mashiach and the Yad Ramah. So the Yad Ramah says, that's Rashi says. Rashi says the God's going to be wondering, but Yad Ramah says no. Even the strongest of people, not God. He says that I'm talking about judgment, so even the strongest person who's after the judgment is going to be nervous. What does it mean turning their face to green? He says, again, Rashi says that it's talking about the Jews and the angels are going to be concerned. So the Yad Ramah says like this: the Yad Ramah disagrees with Rashi. God does not have any doubt. It's talking about to the attribute of compassion that argues the case to God. The attribute of the attribute of compassion tells God, why are you destroying the nations? And so this is a clear attribute, I think. He says, and the attribute of compassion is a creation like any other creations. This is the Yad Ramah says. So if the attribute of compassion is a creation, therefore he's the attribute of creation, of compassion is questioning God like anyone else would question God. Another explanation is HaKadosh Baruch Hu Atzma Emer Kein Lahagid Chazdev Amite Shoysim Yisrael Shema'avid Ma'isa Yadim Pnei Mipneim. And another explanation is that God is just talking it out. That even that he's not saying it in a way of regret or doubt. He's saying, I want you to know I'm going to destroy my one handiwork for the sake of the other handiwork, because of course, I'm going to take care of the Jewish people. So where Rashi says God is kind of in a way of wondering, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan doesn't want to be in such a challenge, the Yad Ramah doesn't accept that explanation, and he continues to have a strong view of God's opinion, God's desire to help the Jewish people in the time of the redemption. Yad Ramah continues this view throughout the Gemorah. So he says, he quotes over here again, the Ramah explains that the reference is to the mighty of the Jewish people who will then be insecure. So the Jewish people are going to be insecure. It's thinking that maybe they're not going to be protected, but Hashem will surely protect them. According to the Ramah, the statement cannot be attributed to God. Like I just said, the Yad Ramah does not agree that God says, this is my handiwork, this is my handiwork, like Rashi says. Instead, everyone, both the Jewish people and the angels, will question whether the Jewish people deserve to have miracles performed for them at the expense of the Gentiles. No, I don't need it. I'll leave it, let everyone's imagination about that one, about the Jewish people themselves questioning if there's if they deserve to be protected on the expense of someone else. That conversation is happening right now. Okay, let's stop here. Any questions? Otherwise, yes, Aaron.
Okay. I'm just curious, knowing that you guys, Lubavitch, Chabad, worship the coming of Moshiach more than any other group of Jews, and you sing about it, you want to be there. What did the Rebbe say about the guy who doesn't want to be there at that time?
Again, listen. The Rabbah was not just anyone. It says about Rabbah that came his time. When the Gemara tells us a story, I think it's in Baba Basra again, Baba Metzia, that they had an argument in heaven about the laws of purity, of impurity, of leprosy. And in heaven, there's an argument between the yeshiva shalmaila and God. God was having an argument in the yeshiva with the people in the yeshiva. The yeshiva learned the law of doubt. If there's a doubtful case of leprosy, the ruling is one way, and God ruled another way. So they said, what are they going to do? They're going to bring Rabbah Bar Nachmoni. They're going to bring him because he's an expert in this field, and let him decide. So what does that mean to bring him? They have to kill him. It's time he's going to have to pass away in order for him to go to heaven. So it says the angel of death couldn't get him because he didn't stop learning. Alter Rebbe quotes in Tanya. He didn't stop saying Torah. So the angel of death had a mission to bring him to the world, and he had a job in the world in the world to come. He had to go answer a question that he had in the yeshiva. So we're talking about a great sage over here. What does it mean? I'm talking about Rabbi Yochanan. So between Rabbi and Rabbi Yochanan, I'm talking about these are the greatest of the great at the time of the Talmud. They say the Magidim, as Rich said, he could bring Moshiach, but we're going to have to be knee deep in blood. It's not. Listen, what from the time of Rabbah till now, we've went through horrible experiences. I mean, aside from the destruction of the temple, we're talking about the Holocaust, and we're talking about other persecutions throughout the Gullus. We're talking about up until this day, and they didn't want to experience these things. But it's a good question. I think from Rabbi Yosef, we learned something from humility. Rabbi Yosef he wasn't saying that it's not going to be bad or it's not going to be challenging. He's saying, I'd rather weather the storm and see it and be part of that experience. But it's a good question, Aaron. It's a hard question also. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Laila Tov, thank you.